morning. Today I have the utmost pleasure of speaking with retired Lieutenant Adam Bercovici. Is that how you pronounce your last name?
That's correct, yes.
Uh, Great. I am happy. And we also have, we are going by the name of Mundo, who is actually an ex-Mexican Mafia gang member, if I'm not mistaken, if I got my notes correct. And
Yes, sir.
today we're here to talk about Discovery Plus's new documentary, American Cartel. Um, uh, Lieutenant, I think maybe you can give us a little backstory on what we're going to see here better than I can explain it.
Sure, yeah. So this is a case that I was involved in 2003. And at the time that this happened, I was a lieutenant assigned to Major Crimes Division in Los Angeles. I had a lot of people working for me. I had part of the FBI Violent Crime Task Force Los Angeles. I had portions of the Joint Terrorism Task Force because this was just shortly after 9/11. So I had quite a few people working for me. I had 3 surveillance teams and a big investigative body, all very experienced investigators that had worked violent crime. So I was off on a Saturday night, and I had just finished actually coaching my son in a youth football game. And I got a call from my boss who was John Miller, who is still currently involved in law enforcement. He is the chief of intelligence at NYPD. And he called me and said, how fast can you get your people down to Burbank? And I asked him, what's going on? And he said, we've got 1 officer's been killed and 1 is circling the drain. That was the term he used, which means he was in grave condition. So this is not the first time I've gotten calls of similar nature. So we got up and I started, calling the phone tree and getting people. I had probably 12 or 13 supervisors underneath me. So I just started making calls, but we really knew very little about the case. I mean, we did not know what we had. I mean, it was that mysterious to me. And you're trying to get information, but this was only within about an hour and a half of the actual shooting. So we were moving pretty quickly. And I remember coming down the 5 freeway in Burbank, and there was not a single car except mine on the freeway. The whole freeway was shut down. And so we got down there, and I was contacted by Captain Tim Steer of the Burbank Police Department, who explained to me what had happened, that there had been a traffic stop with 1 officer, and that there had been a shooting. We had 1 officer that was killed, 1 suspect was dead, and another suspect had fled. And Burbank's a small city. They're not really set up for this kind of stuff. They're really not. And sadly, in a weird way, at LAPD, we do this all the time. I mean, in one form or another, all of us had done, these giant spin-ups, many times. And really, these things are management, kind of a thing. You have to manage all these people. You've got hundreds of people streaming in. And what you don't want is to turn into a social circle. Everybody's standing around, looking for a snack and talking to each other. You want to get people functioning. So we started moving into this, and we, Burbank has 178 officers. We have 10,000. We had LA County sheriffs. We had the DEA, FBI. And remember, I had FBI people assigned to my task force as well as ATF. So we immediately started, making those calls. And the case started working its way through there. And the biggest thing that we had to do immediately was to manage clues, because it's not rocket science. You're going to start getting clues from the neighborhood. We were launching surveillance teams into the neighborhood. We were told pretty quickly that they identified that it was a Vineland Boy, gang member that had been killed by the officers. So we knew, and we had a history with Vineland Boys. We knew about them because they had killed a police officer in 1988 when they were kind of a low end gang, when they really didn't have a lot of juice, and they had kind of flown under the wire. I remember I was a watch commander in uniform a few years before in North Hollywood, and so I was aware of their existence because they were making their rise. But we all knew Vineland Boys. They had killed a police officer named James Bea in 1988. He was disarmed with his own gun and shot and killed. And that suspect he was killed by the police, I think early in the morning. So that morning, but so we knew about them. So we took the case away for a little bit. We went up to our foothill station with some people from Burbank, and we started to organize it. And we quickly realized, based on some of the evidence that we recovered from the suspect's vehicle, that this was not just your average gang type incident where officers had wandered into this thing. This was a sophisticated operation. There was methamphetamine that was located, and it was high quality, not something you would see on the street. And so over the 13, 14-day period, this began to evolve. And without spoiling the show, just a lot of information came in, a lot of stuff came in, and we realized we had quite the case on our hands. And later on, it became a large-scale racketeering case. So yeah, it was. And so the way I became involved in it, in terms of a producer, after I retired 9 years ago, I work in television a little bit, and I became friends with one of the producers on a show I was on with History Channel. And this story has always stuck with me. It's been like, because nobody knows about it, and it's a great story of what we can do that's good, right? It's a great story of what we in law enforcement can do and how we can work together on a big case and put our giant egos to the side and work together cooperatively to make something happen. And it was Dan Johnstone, who was one of our producers, and I became very good friends with him as we were traveling around the world on this History Channel show. And we talked about it. And a couple of years ago, we started talking about it again, and the timing was good, and we made it happen. He made it happen. And if you know anything about Hollywood, people that make it happen is a rare thing sometimes. A lot of promises, but he made it happen. And so we've got a great limited series. And it's not about good guys and bad guys. And I think Mundo can kind of talk about that a little bit. This is something that's been going on in Los Angeles my whole career. It's a cultural thing. With gangs and how they achieve, their goals and how they get young men and women to be part of the gang. So it's not about good guys and bad guys. It's about life in LA and how these things happen and how, law enforcement and the gang culture kind of remain sometimes at a easy truce, and then they cross paths, and sometimes very bad things can happen. So that's kind of the essential part of the show. That explains everything.
I think one of the words that you used that stuck out was sophisticated. Now, the same way that you guys in law enforcement are very organized and very proactive, Mundo, if you can comment a little bit about what is the reaction from a gang's point of view when something like this happens? Because you guys are just as sophisticated. I see it as a giant chess match. And I think sometimes, they're seen more as, thugs and things like that, but there's so many layers of organization that when something like this happens, what is the reaction?
It's always a cat and mouse game when it comes to the, gang members and members of the law enforcement community, for sure. If you'd have asked me 20 years ago to describe the Vineland Boys street gang, I would have said they're just a copy and paste gang of hundreds of Mexican gangs in Los Angeles and Southern California. But what I love about this American Cartel episode on the Vineland gang is that it's going to show how there is no such thing as just a small or copy and paste street gang. All of them are potentially dangerous, very dangerous. And the Vineland Boys are a great example of that. When I think of the gangs in LA, I think of 18th Street, and Adam is familiar being LAPD or LA Sheriff. Those guys know it's second nature to any gang cop or any patrol cop who these guys are. They know them very well. And so you think of 18th Street, MS-13, I can go on and on ad nauseum. So Vineland Boys, it's great because now you're showing the American people that any gang can sprout. I think they came into existence in the 80s sometime, mid 80s maybe. And look at them now. As far as their capabilities of viciousness, the threat to the community, the threat to law enforcement. And I have developed through the decades a heart for law enforcement. I train throughout the country and internationally on how prison gangs control street gangs and the relationship with the cartels. But getting back to your question, I was asked by one of the guys that put on this production, what are some of the things that could come into play when you have just killed a police officer or committed a 187, a murder? What comes into play right away? And my first three answers were, number one, get as much money as you can, quick money, because you're going to need some cash whenever you're on the run. Number two, ditch your cell phone. Get rid of your cell phone because they're going to be able to track you. And number three, because of the proximity for Southern California or even California gang member, head to the border, south of the border, where you can collect yourself. And it's funny, as I said that, I not knowing all the details, as you guys know, and Adam knows, and the people who put on the show, that's exactly what this guy did. Is one fugitive. All three of these things came into play. So that was my in the gang world. Yes, all the gangs hear about that, and it's a status thing with gang members. I can tell you that status is very important, extremely important. Making money there's three components that I talk about when I talk about the subservience of the LA and Southern California street gangs to the Mexican Mafia. You got the status factor, extremely important. You have the fear factor, and the fear factor is not a trembling in your boots kind of fear. It's a fear of being ostracized and becoming a nobody, which means you lose your status. So they don't want to lose their status. So you got the status, the fear, and then now you got the money factor. Well, money's always been a factor. Even when I was a kid selling drugs, who wants to get a 9-to-5 job when you can sell drugs, right? And the cartels are interwoven into the fabric of gang life. It doesn't have to be direct. Many times it is, many times it isn't. It's indirect. But in every case, you have that common denominator. And then you have a group like the Mexican Mafia now that's acting as a facilitator, as a go-between, because they tax all these gangs. Vineland Boys are no exception. They are sureños. And Adam, I'm sure you can confirm what that is. Sureño is the Spanish word for Southern, which denotes Southern California. That's where it originated, in LA, in Southern California. So when you're a Sureño, you're claiming allegiance. It's the creation of the Mexican Mafia. It's a way of controlling the gangs for tax purposes and for other things that they do in their world. And so the Vineland Boys, many gangs operate on their own, but they also pay tributes. And so what happens with the cartels today now is the cartels are very involved in dealing directly with the with the Mexican Mafia, in order to bypass and not have so they don't have to deal directly with a lot of the gangs if they don't have to. So you have, again, going back to your question, the status thing. So when gangs hear of an officer getting killed, even though most of the OGs will discourage the youngsters from engaging with police officers, because that brings unwanted heat. When LAPD or LA Sheriff's Department gets one of theirs killed by a gang member, I think every gang can tell you what happens as a result of that. Doors get knocked down, people get, I know today is not politically correct to say that, the police departments are going to go do this and that, but you know what? They do, and they do it the right way. And they go and it's a show of force. So gang members know when something like that happens, they better watch out, because there could be that secondary smoke, so they need to lay low a little bit and let this thing kind of die down. It's not a good thing for business when you kill a police officer.
Thank you for that. That's very, very insightful. Lieutenant, you're coming in from LAPD. Burbank had not lost an officer in a couple of decades. What's your mindset going into that department, knowing the stress level and just the emotions that are probably going through everybody's minds, and still having to get the job done?
Well, this happens in law enforcement, even when an officer in our own agency is lost. You have to take the emotion out of it. Very quickly for us as professionals, it's about making the case. It's not about revenge. It's yes, we're going to serve search warrants. We're going to do investigative stuff, but it's not about revenge. It's not about playing catch up, because that's how you lose a case. That's how stuff becomes inadmissible in court later. Problems procedurally. So the first thing with us that I realized, I was the first LAPD person of any rank on scene, is that we needed to kind of remove them from it from a short while, just so we could gather. And, there's a concept of clue management that's called in law enforcement, where you start to manage clues, because that's what's happening. You're just going to start getting a bunch of information, and you don't want to run on what we call bum scoop, right? So you get bum scoop and you're off on the wrong path. So we want to manage that. So that my thought was initially right away is and with their approval, we're not going to steal it from them. It's their officer. But my suggestion was let's manage this. Let's get this away from us a little bit. We know that now. We believe, based on the initial information, that the suspect had fled into North Hollywood, which is the city of Los Angeles. So we knew that we had our involvement was there. So that's my thought as a manager, as a lieutenant, is I need to get my personnel. I need to figure out where we're going to use our resources. You could have a lot of resources, but if you don't know how to use them and place them, it's a waste of time. So they used us right away. We had 3 surveillance teams, and I knew that was going to be integral, because we needed to get into the neighborhood and set up a point and start seeing what was happening. And surveillance teams are not proactive. They're not going to make arrests. They're not going to do anything. They're going into a really dangerous situation. And I know Mundo can talk about it. I mean, these neighborhoods, it's a family thing. Everybody's looking out. It's not like every car that goes in there that's not a car that they recognize. I mean, in the old days, I go back to the 80s when I came on in 82, it was the whistles, right? One time, all the things that you would hear, all the different gangs, both Black and Hispanic. But so, we had to deploy them. So, and not just deploy them kind of haphazardly, but have a system in place, know what we have. We knew pretty quickly that it was a Vineland boy, because the deceased suspect had a tattoo that identified him, and Burbank's gang unit said that's a Vineland boy. So we knew that. We knew that we had that. But now it was managing that and doing that. And Burbank, so again, they had actually never lost an officer to gunfire. I believe the last officer that was killed was hit by a train, 60, 70, maybe more years ago. So this is new to them. And so, but it's a careful road you want to tread, because as LAPD or LA sheriffs, we want to come in and say, hey, step aside. You guys don't know what you're doing. We're going to take care of it. They absolutely knew what they were doing. They just needed a minute to gather their thoughts. I'll give you an example. In an LAPD, if an officer is killed in a division, another division is going to come in and handle it. I mean, that's why we have to, that's why we're big, somebody to take the emotion out of it. So you don't have mistakes. And you allow them to gather their chance, gather like all their composure, and then kind of, so we brought them in, very quickly. But that was my main thought that night. And remember, we had people coming in from everywhere. It was incredible. Within, I would say within about 10 hours, we had 700-800 police officers and detectives, FBI, everybody there. The one thing I can say about Burbank is you have to feed the troops, right? So after about a day, the city of Burbank, small, close city, they really responded to this. So we moved everything back to the command post at Burbank. And, once you feed people, they will come and be happy and do their work. So we had lots of food, good food, I could say. You had to watch your waistline for the 2 weeks I was there, because it was, one big restaurant after another. And that was nice. And that's important. But to answer your question, my thoughts were about management and about keeping people focused. And I was lucky, I think one of the things as a lieutenant that you have to realize, and for those that don't know, lieutenant is a mid-manager. So I'm a manager. I mean, I had done all the other jobs, but I had really good people working for me. I had people that could write search warrants, people that understood that, and that, if you're successful, you let your people do their job. You let your people do the thing, and you run interference for them. I was a football player, so I say I throw downfield blocks for people, right? I keep command staff out of the way because they can be troublesome. They can come in and offer sometimes, kind of advice that's not really warranted, or make decisions from the 30,000 foot level, which we don't need. Luckily in this thing, and you'll see in the show, the command and the deputy chief levels, they stayed out of the way, even up to Bratton. Nobody, I think this was successful because it was run at the lieutenant, maybe captain level by people, including Tim Steer, who later became chief and was the captain. He had a lot of narcotics experience as a police officer. He had worked dope. So all of us kind of understood what we needed to get done. There was no no, that's a bad idea. My idea is better. It was, that's a great idea. Let's make it happen. And that's the thing that I really, that's why I felt so passionate years later about this case, because that is not a typical thing that happens in law enforcement. You get the LAPD and FBI, DEA working together, and sometimes it's nothing but little children having fits about their way is better. and it slows things up. And we did not have that occur this time. And I think the hundreds of people that were involved, you talk to anybody, but when we started putting this show together, my job was the cop wrangler. I started calling people and saying, hey, you want to be part of this? Everybody said, yes, I remember this. And it wasn't like, sure, it was terrible that the Pavelkas, lost their son, but it was also because people had such great, strong memories of this case. And I also want to, discuss that the Pavelka family, like Mike and Sue, were very much involved in this. That was one of the first things we did, is we reached out and we met with them. And they're phenomenal people. Mike is a retired detective, so he's a law enforcement veteran, and they're incredible people. How they handled this grief, how they handled what happened, is really something that is commendable and something that will really stand out in the show. I think people will find that. I mean, to me, it's very highly emotional how they handled this. They did a remarkable job.
Mundo, can you talk about those networks of neighborhoods that are going to help a member that's fleeing or that needs to hide or that needs money, that needs just a place to stay?
Well, it's a lot easier today than it was before. And I hate to keep talking about the Mexican Mafia's involvement, because this episode or this docu-series is more about the great work that the officers did and tracking down the perpetrators and everything. But in the old days, when you have gangs that are at odds with each other, they're not going to be very cooperative back then. But today, because they're all under the umbrella of the Mexican Mafia, there is cooperation, a lot of it. And in fact, there's a lot of mortal rivals that don't fight each other anymore because of this. So being on the run, if you go into another, if you know gang members from another gang and they've heard of what happened, under normal situation, you don't talk to people and say, hey, I just killed a cop. But if you're a gang member and you have a level of trust with certain other gang members from other gangs, it's developed through time in youth authority incarcerations, county jail, and in state prison. So if you know somebody that from another gang that might be of help to you, you're going to get it. And these guys, they're all doing the same thing. They're selling drugs. They're paying taxes. They're blessed by the Mexican Mafia. So there's a spirit of cooperation, kind of like the law enforcement community. You have Adam talks about this cooperation, and I know firsthand from working undercover for 14 months with the task force back in the day, how petty some of the rival agencies can be. And I'm over here looking at them like, we got a big picture here. What's wrong with you guys? And, but that happens sometimes, and people like Adam, people that are experienced, have to kind of get them to say, look, we're professionals and we have a big picture here we got to look at. Well, gang members look at it the same way. There's a big picture. These are all brothers, so to speak, and they're brothers as gang members, and there's a spirit of cooperation going on here. You're only contributing to that spirit of cooperation, which is in existence. And so, yes, you can tap into another gang for aid. But in the immediate flight, like I said earlier, you want money, quick cash, you want to ditch your cell phone, and you want to get out of the danger zone. That's out of LA, out of Southern California, out of California. And Mexico is a logical. If I were a law enforcement guy, the first place I would look immediately would be the border, and then you can work. I mean, obviously you got your local guys looking around, looking locally in case he's hiding out somewhere locally. That's all good. But I would quickly throw something down to the border, San Diego authorities, whatever, and because that's where a lot of us would go to. We had a prolific hitter, Alfie Sosa. He was a monster that I am accused of creating. And where would he hide out? Tijuana. When he felt that the heat was on, we had placed safe houses in Tijuana. So yeah, gang cooperation south of the border. I mean, there you are. There you have it. These are the places of refuge, if you will. I mean, yeah. I mean, if somebody has a place in the mountains in Lake Tahoe or whatever up north, I mean, okay. you know, but I'm just kind of giving a typical scenario.
Lieutenant, how often do big cases like this develop from just traffic stops?
Well, and when we first started shooting this, that was one of the first things, I guess, my line that I came up with, and that most big cases, not all, but there's kind of this feeling in police work that the traffic stop, it's the investigative stop. Traffic stops also result in bad things happen. We see traffic stops happen in questionable shootings and things that bring a lot of kind of negative press on the police. But in reality, a good police officer making, that instinctual stop, developing his reasonable suspicion of probable cause and making that stop, that can result in a lot of things. I can think back at my own career. I remember years ago, 4 people we saw in a car that committed a traffic violation. We thought, man, we got to stop these guys. Long story short, we stopped them. This is back in the 80s. They had multiple weapons in the car, $275,000 in cash, and stacks of kilos of cocaine, back when cocaine was king. And that was just on a traffic stop when I was a police officer back in the mid 80s. And so it's really part of that. And we teach, I don't know if it's a skill that we're losing right now, because I think the computerized generation officers, they're still very good proactive officers. But the traffic stop, the ability for an officer to know the law, to know what he can do, to know how to make that investigative, that consensual stop, to talk to people, it's so important. It really is. And in this case, Greg Campbell, who survived the shooting, it was a perfect storm. He has 19 years on. He's a very experienced police officer. He had just come out of narcotics in Burbank. It's a rotational assignment, because they're small, so you got to go back to patrol. Comes back as a senior officer. He was a SWAT guy as well. So he had all these experience. So, when he got to the back of the Ramada Inn, he saw something to him that wasn't right, and the result was he was almost killed, and Matt Pavelka was murdered. But it's those stops. It's that sixth sense that a good cop has. It really is, and being able to develop it legally so you can keep the case. I think that's the thing when you work a big case like this. To me, over the years, and I've worked other big cases, that are similar. That is the thing that is in my mind. We've got to keep this case. We've got to keep the sanctity of this case. Because when all of this stuff is done, all of the SWAT warrants and the surveillance, we're going to be in court, and we got to make sure this is clean, and that is huge, because one procedural error, one mistake, when I forgot to advise him of his rights, or when he invoked, I kept asking him questions or things like that, whatever the case may be. There's all kinds of scenarios or any questions, and you can hold up a good case. And it would be terrible to lose a case like this for the family. And really, this transfers to any homicide investigation where the victim is not a police officer, where the victim is just somebody that was unlucky, and their family. So to me, as an investigative lieutenant, that's my job. Make sure we keep, and my people were good about that too. We had some. I think this case is exceptional because there was a lot of integrity. Integrity was kept, and that's huge. So we do have these come up every once in a while. They're shortly after this, we had the Avenues case, and we had Drew Street, and there was I went to another assignment, but I was involved in it because I ran a specialized unit that followed very, very bad people, called the Special Investigation Section. I was the officer in charge of that unit after this happened. So we had cases that were similar, and we managed them the same way. But we do have them, and it's kind of like, you do these things often enough, you kind of know the routine, and you know what you have to do, and you steel yourself for it. You get there, you see thousands of cops, and you go, okay, how do I bring order to this, right? And that's really what it is. So we do work those quite a bit.
Can I interject something? You asked a question revolving around traffic stops, and I can tell you the city of Los Angeles on any given day has an unknown number of people that are armed and that are on their way to a crime scene or on their way from one. I know this from my days. Okay, we were always armed. Sometimes we were armed even if we weren't on our way to a crime scene or from a crime scene. Okay, and one of the things that every convict that's out on parole, he is aware of how many strikes he has against him. So there's an old saying that we always had that if I get pulled over, I'm going to hold court. And holding court is an expression for either suicide by cop or killing a cop if you get pulled over. So, in training, I'm sure all the agencies train their officers till they're blue in the face about not taking any traffic stop for granted. And I just want to re-emphasize that has to be driven home, because I know of different incidents that came so close, and if it wasn't for the man upstairs or some good luck, the one California Highway Patrol officer was inches from getting killed, except when he opened the trunk and threw the empty bottle of whiskey contents. He was a good cop. He gave him a break. I don't know that that's a good thing, but he gave him a break. He poured the contents. He told the guy to open the trunk. When he opened the trunk, he didn't. Any curious officer is going to look to see what's in the trunk. This guy didn't. And it's good for him that he didn't, because there's another occupant from the car that's outside with the gun in his waistband, and he's stretching. That's another dumb move on that officer. He never should have let an occupant of a vehicle exit the vehicle, right? But he's standing out there stretching and waiting to see if he's going to see that gun. And if he does, he's going to produce the gun and open fire. Well, he opened the trunk, threw the empty whiskey bottle inside and slammed it closed, and he survived. Nothing happened to him. But there's so many, the potential for officer killings they're there. They abound. And it's getting the young guys and teaching them that you cannot take anything as routine. All this, and I call it profiling, or you can call it common sense, whatever you want to call it. Anybody that has common sense knows how to proceed. An experienced cop would not have handled it the way this guy did. But you're going to have young officers, and young officers they don't have that experience. So when you're developing the robotic mind as you're training them, it doesn't catch on to some, and that's probably why they become victims. So anyway, I just thought I'd interject that.
No, he's correct. In this case, and you'll see in the series, Matt Pavelka just got unlucky, because they missed Garcia, who was in the car, and they thought they were engaging one suspect. So that was unfortunate. He went down, and you'll see, he went down shooting, Pavelka did, but he's absolutely right. Over the years, and in LAPD, we are, from the day you come on the job, that is ground into your head about traffic stops, and the way we did it. In fact, there's a historical basis that goes back to the 70s, to when the Black Panther found, when the Black Panthers were very active, and there was lots of shootings going on, and we really, over the years, we really emphasized that. And so I've watched other agencies over the years, and not everybody is like that. And we're lucky in LA because we run 2 officer vehicles, and that's a huge asset. I know as a sergeant, I work by myself, and stopping somebody by yourself is no joke, because if you've got 4 people in the car, you can't keep your eye on all of them, and sadly in this country, most places, except for a few of the big major cities, run one-man cars, and that's extremely dangerous. It really is. So that's something to consider as well. So yeah, I think to answer your question, finally, I think the traffic stop is the key, and good investigative work by experienced street police officers. In the movies, it's always the detectives that get all the stuff, right? But in the reality, it's that good street cop that knows, what's going on.
I've had the pleasure of doing ride-alongs with the Madera Police Department in the Central Valley, and getting off for a traffic stop was terrifying. So definitely big ups to all the officers who have to do this routinely, because the 2 or 3 times that I had to get off the car with the officer were scary.
Yeah.
Now to wrap it up, I know we're running a little bit low on time. The same question to both of you. What do you hope audiences take away from American Cartel?
I would say the demented mind that exists out there, even more so. I'm going to add with the proliferation of methamphetamine. Meth screws up a lot of minds out there and makes them do things. I'm not excusing them. I'm just giving an observation. It makes people more bold and do things that they maybe ordinarily wouldn't do, and that's dangerous. So you got the demented mindset. You have the cartel influence, the Mexican Mafia influence that brings organization, that brings a different dimension. I mean, you got law enforcement is not just going up against a regular run-of-the-mill gang member anymore. So when we use the word sophistication, it's leaps and bounds ahead of what existed. They're growing. Their sophistication is increasing. They're getting better at what they do, and law enforcement has to grow right along with them.
I think there are two things, and I want to give props to Mundo because he really brought that out in the show, and I really like that part that you did. I think there's two things from a law enforcement standpoint. I think this is a great example of what we can do when we put our minds to it, the kind of good work we can do, right? That with all the negative publicity that law enforcement gets nowadays, this is something that shows what we can do when we really put our mind to it and how we can really combat evil. And on the same note, I think the show really touches, and this was kind of an organic thing that happened with the show, and I think Mundo really brought this, is that this is a cultural thing. This is a cultural war between two societies and two different societies existing, kind of coexisting, and that people don't understand that. We tend to vilify gang members. We tend to say, oh, they're all bad people, but for them, it's a way of life. And I think also, as long as there is a demand for drugs, like methamphetamine, and there's a supply source, these things are going to continue to happen. We'll have another version of this. We'll have another officer that'll be killed or hurt. It's happening all the time. And I remember talking about the Vineland Boys, how much things change. You know, MS-13, right? Very well known across the world. In 1984, when I was a young gang cop, they were nothing, literally. We called them the professional victims. 18th Street and Playboys all the time were taking them out, beating them up, shooting them. 10 years later, I came back to the same unit in West Bureau Crash as a sergeant, and they were running high quality weapons. They were feared. 10 years, that's all it took. Vineland Boys, in a 15-year period, went from, they actually did kill a police officer, but they were young kids wearing heavy metal t-shirts, you know, and within 15 years, they were sophisticated, flying under the wire. I mean, dressing like cartel members, not like typical gang members you would imagine. These guys flew under the wire. That's how sophisticated. That's something I think that's an important story to tell. And I think it's a story that the American public will really find interesting because they're there. And you may, you know, not everybody is wearing, you know, a white tank top and low run shorts. These guys are dressed nice, designer jeans, nice clothes, flying under the wire, looking like everybody else. That's how sophisticated they are. They're driving right by cops, and it's going to take a while, and this will happen again. It will. So hopefully this is a good lesson, and I'm excited about this show because, so again, not about good guys and bad guys. It's about life in the streets.
Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. Discovery Plus's American Cartel actually drops today, March 30th. So be sure to check it out. And I hope you both have a great day and a happy Easter this weekend.
Great. Thank you. It was nice meeting you, Mundo. Nice meeting you as well.
Likewise. Take care, both of you.
Bye-bye.